Good evening, everyone. Good evening, sirs. I would like to welcome both of you on behalf of ISPP. My name is Shubhangi Vaishnavi Narayan. Currently, I'm a junior associate at Chase India, uh, and also a part of the passing out batch of ISPP. Today, I'll be introducing you to our audience and also moderating the session along with my friend Harshita. We will be waiting for around 2 more minutes for all the participants to join, and then we'll formally begin the session.
Thank you, Shubhangi.
Okay, all right. So let's begin. Hi again to all the participants and our panelists. Thank you for taking your time out on a Saturday evening. The topic today that we are going to be discussing is corporates from a public policy perspective. I, for one, when I came to ISPP, I used to think that public policy was meant for civil servants. Most of my batch was a UPSC aspirant for 2 or 3 years of their life, a minimum. Coming to ISPP and understanding the various roles that a public policy professional can take in today's day and age really opened avenues for me. Now, sirs, I would like to ask both of you that this session is going to be for all the panelists who have joined us from various backgrounds, and they would like to understand that what the role of a public policy professional would look like in a corporate setting. This webinar entails to answer broadly these aspects, like what are the essential skills of a successful career in this domain, and what kind of skill sets do recruiters look for when they're hiring for public policy roles, right? So I'll begin by introducing our two illuminary panelists, Dr. Devashish Das Gupta and Dr. Akhil Prasad. Dr. Akhil Prasad is a certified company secretary in India and the UK. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree in law from India, as well as a PhD in commerce and a doctorate in law from India. Dr. Prasad is also a solicitor of England and Wales and has earned a master's of law from Northwestern University, USA, and a business administration degree from IE Business School, Spain. His professional journey spans about 25 years, during which he has been fortunate to work as general counsel and member of the board of directors for several prominent companies. Dr. Prasad's career began with Xerox, followed by Electrolux, General Motors, the Walt Disney Company, and Fidelity. Since 2013, he has been with Boeing, and during his time, he has also been a part of Wharton Business School. Thank you so much, sir, for joining our panel. It will be great to hear from you and learn from your experiences. Mr. Devashish has had 2 decades of rich experience across diverse sectors include FMCG, food service, information technology, infrastructure, media, and automobiles. Mr. Devashi started his career after qualifying as a chartered accountant at Arthur Anderson's Business Advisory and Taxation Practice. Post this, he founded and headed a consulting business for over 10 years, assisting multinational companies' entry and business and government affairs strategy for India. Following his successful consultancy, Devashi set up the India operations for a leading international public affairs consulting, APCO Worldwide, as their first managing director for India and South Asia. Devashish later joined Diago's business as Director Corporate Relations for India and South Asia, and subsequently joined Google as the country head of public policy. His last assignment prior to joining HUL was as Executive Vice President for GSK Consumer Healthcare, India and South Asia. We have learned that he is an avid marathoner and an endurance cyclist. Welcome to you, sir, and please, I request both of you now to speak a few words, and then maybe our panelists can join you for question Q&A.
So, Dr. Dasgupta, I think please take a lead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Akhil, and thank you, Shubhangi, for the introduction. And I'm really looking forward to this engagement with everybody on this webinar. And to whatever extent we'll be able to share our experiences in this interesting space. So maybe I'll spend a couple of minutes to just give a sense of, from my time. You mentioned 2 decades. Actually, I've had now 3 decades of working experience. So I'm come from the time when this profession was considered to be, a government liaison profession, and typically companies would have, or larger companies like maybe Tata's or Hindustan Lever would have what we call as resident directors or resident managers in Delhi, and their role at that time was limited to making sure that the licenses to operate, which they were working in India, were taken care of and managed well. Those were days when not too many regulators were in place, and therefore the work was very, very different. And what we saw was the big transformation happened in the early 90s when the liberalization happened. Many industries and sectors opened up for private participation. And when private participation happened, they realized that there needs to be a way and a mechanism to regulate some of these, so that good rules and regulations for governance are established. So I remember during my Arthur Anderson days, power was the first sector that was opened up, and then number of power companies came in, regulations were established, followed by telecom, and then of course some of the other sectors. But now, fast track from there to maybe the last 15 or 18 years, maybe 20 years, is when a lot more regulators came into space, specific industry regulators came into space. There was a need to engage with the government on these regulations, build on the regulations that were already set up, and also ensure that the license to operate for these companies continue to be well established. And that's where I think the space of this profession evolved. And also, Shubhangi mentioned I had made that switch from what I was doing as a chartered accountant to then heading up, starting a consulting company, a public affairs consulting company called APCO Worldwide. For me, that was an opportunity to learn how public affairs is done internationally, and I literally learned because I had a very different education. I was a chartered accountant by training. I was not even a lawyer, because the lawyers still understand regulations much better. But I learned that way by actually starting to do work. We've seen this evolution very nicely, and I think the topic today is about careers, and I think Now it is evolved very well. So careers are not only in the corporate side, in the public affairs teams that maybe Akhil and I kind of represent in our respective sectors, but also trade bodies, industry bodies like FICCI, CII, consulting companies like where Shubhangi works, and then APCO and other companies. Think tanks employ public professionals, public policy professionals. Uh, we've also seen a lot of young people working for parliamentarians, uh, and learn how legislations are drafted. So I think that evolution has happened, and therefore this space has really opened up, and therefore the opportunities are immense right now. And along with the opportunities, I think the need for sharpening your knowledge, sharpening your skills, is very very important. And I think one of the two things that I would end by saying in the opening remark is, whatever changes, there are a few basic skills that you need as a public affairs professional. I think your ability to understand how government functions is something that you should learn as early as possible, whether through the curriculum that you're going through or you've gone through, or otherwise. And of course the process in which the policies are made. And there are nuances, from one government to the other. There will be slight differences in which you know uh, some the way the public policies are managed. So understanding that is very very critical. And finally, your ability to network, know people, build relations is very important. Gone are the days when somebody would say, how many people do you know would get you the job? It's not important necessarily, because you need to know people all the time. So it's a dynamic process. You need to know them, and you have to build that as a skill. So I'll kind of pause here, and maybe pass it on to my friend Akhil to take this forward.
No, I completely agree with you, Devashish, what you said. And like you, uh, my journey also has been for about 3 decades. Um, and what transformation we have seen in that period is in the 80s, 70s, and the 80s, the service provider entities, the business entities used to be the entities owned by the government and the state governments. But when the big bang happened after 1991, so there were also some private sector companies, but largely the big businesses were being controlled by large PSUs. And that is where the real transformation started to happen, that gradually, the government started to lift its control over what industry sectors will be, so should be thrown open to private sector. And there has been a lot of reform. And today, when we see the number of government companies and the central government companies are very, very few in a very, very limited sector. So what has really happened is that the bulk of the policy and its implementation today happens through a partnership between the government, which formulates the policy, and the private sector, which from a corporate side, whether it's services or goods, it's been provided by the private sector. So I completely agree that, because being a lawyer, I had definitely some kind of an exposure about how the regulators operate. And the introduction, Shubhangi, you gave about me, all these companies that I worked for. I was the first general counsel for all these companies in India, whether it was Disney, whether it was Fidelity, or Boeing currently. And most of these companies were wanting to set up the businesses in India in line with the objectives of the government. So, for example, if I were to give an example of Disney wanted to. So we were. It was the time when the cable television was exploding, and then government were coming up with guidelines. You must also imagine, during the early 2000, when the telecom and the media companies were entering into India. I think most of the regulations that have been formulated for the telecom sector and the media sector were formulated by the private sector. So it was formulated by, say, the TRAIs and the Department of Telecommunication. But I think a great deal of fantastic work was done by the private sector, whether it was Airtel, whether it was Vodafone, whether all those entrants at that point of time, we don't even remember who those entrants were, but there were several licenses which were issued. But the bulk of the work for the policies with the government, I think private sector played a very, very important role. Likewise, for example, during those days when the media and entertainment business was exploding, I think a lot of these private companies worked with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and the TRAIs to set up the guidelines and the policies how India should look at broadcasting and media and entertainment. And today we only see how this has really shaped up. Perhaps there is no other country in the world where you can have or boast about 1.4 billion population, everybody having a smartphone, everybody watching content on a smartphone. So it goes a very, very long way in terms of how private sector seamlessly, and we can see it was quite visible how the government control went away and how the private sector is now leading the reforms and the kind of aspirations of the government to make India, one of the largest economies of the world. So I must say that the corporate sector has a great role to play in partnership with the government as a policy making. So in terms of what skills should professionals have or aspirants have, I think a very simple skill is the ability to have an open mind. And so no qualification can assure you a good career, but an open mind will definitely assure you a great career. So the moment you open your mind to actually work with your client, to solve problems for your client, I think that is the only essential key you need to have. Otherwise, I may be a lawyer, Debashish may be a chartered accountant, some of me may be a HR professional. After few initial years, it doesn't matter. I think what matters is what is the problem with your client? What is the problem with your company? Is your company finding some problems with the government, and how effectively you can bridge that gap to solve those problems for your clients is the key, for which you have to then decide what are the skills that you need to have, whether you need to be you are very good on your public policy matter subjects. Do you also need to learn some financial aspects? So do that course. Do you also want to do some legal aspects? So do that course. So your career, it's like what kind of it's like a ninja. How many swords you have in your career is important. So public policy may be one of those swords, but you may really need to think whether you need more swords or one is enough. And one probably is enough, but what are those kind of skills, and do you have that open mind to become a ninja? And that is, to me, is the most important thing.
Very well said, sir. I think most of our time at ISPP, we were also learning and unlearning a lot of things. Many industry stalwarts came and they explained us the importance of networking and keeping an open mind throughout the process. We would take up more questions and ask a lot more questions to gain more from the experience over this next 45 minutes. Before I open the floor for questions from our attendees, I would like to say that here, while we are here in this webinar, we are just here out of our own academic curiosity to learn. And whether I ask a question, I am not representing Chase, in the company I work at. Similarly, whatever opinions our panelists will give you will come from their own personal experience and shall in no manner be taken as the standpoint of the companies they work at or any kind of political ideologies or whatsoever. So we have to keep an open mind here as well. Having said that, let's open the floor for questions. I do have one question on the chat box, and it is from an anonymous question. It is directed towards Devashish sir. The person says that he is a CA finalist, he or she is a CA finalist, awaiting results in the next week. And the question is twofold. One, whether it is a good decision to start the corporate career as a public sector consultant. And second, what advantages can he or she take in the public sector field of their degree as a CA?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think it's a great question. I think it's never too early or never too late to begin. It's purely about where your interests lie. Like I said, fortunately today we are in a space where public policy has a lot of opportunities and a lot of career opportunities. So if that's the interest area for you, definitely go in there. Doesn't mean what education. I mean, Akhil mentioned that it doesn't matter what qualification you do. I always say that qualifications are a very good way of disciplining your mind and your way of going about. So if that's what interests you, start as early as you want to. Spend time with people who've done this. Try and see if you can have a mentor in while you go through that. Do that. In terms of how your education will help you, all educations help because education is a way of opening your mind, like Akhil mentioned. That's there is no better way of opening your mind than education has. I think for me, what has helped purely from the degree of chartered accountancy that I've done is it has been easy for me, or relatively easy for me, to sit in a leadership meeting and understand the business. uh, you know uh, to ability to understand numbers, because I studied numbers, it has helped me to understand the business from a numbers perspective, and I really enjoy that. I love business, and that's where I try and bring in how I can marry business and business problems through solutions through this. So I think that's will really help you. Your stakeholders, your internal stakeholders in your company will also like it, because they will not see you as somebody who talks only domain expertise work, but is able to talk about and is able to contribute in a business manner because you understand a bit of business. So that's how I would respond.
So if I
I
could
think, sir,
ask
one
a
of the
clarifying questions on that. We'll let the participant after few seconds, because since you mentioned that it will be better to have a more holistic experience of the business and the domain that we are experts in. How important do you think is that a public policy professional should have a deep understanding of the industry they are working in? Let's say you have worked in FMCG sector, or even for that
Yeah,
matter, GSK Council.
yeah.
So what kind of expertise, what level of depth does a public policy professional need to have of the sector that they are working in?
Yeah, so good question again. So I think you definitely need to understand the business, because if you don't understand the business, you will not understand the problem that the business is facing. It does not therefore mean that you need to go into too much of depth of the business. You need to understand the business so that you can link the problem with a policy outcome that you're trying to achieve, and you have to bring that together. So going back and then saying that, have that conversation. And when you go into, because if you see my career, I have worked in very different industries, same I think with Akhil. So I'm sure we've all spent the first few months learning the business. So don't hesitate to learn from people who are in the business. The first few months, no one will say anything. But if you start asking about business after 2 years in the business, then you have a problem. So start learning right from the beginning. Ask the questions. Right, wrong doesn't matter. Learn the business, and then try and relate the issues with the business. So that's what I would say. You don't have to be a marketing expert or an expert in any other specific field, but how you are able to understand that and relate. All I The way I look at it is, consider yourself that you are the future CEO of your business. A CEO is a generalist typically, right? He or she should be able to understand the business from every perspective. So if you are literally representing your CEO, whose job, one of the important jobs, is to deal with the external world, then you should also kind of ensure that you are able to understand that level of the business, uh, to be able to explain that to people outside who you are bringing the policy issues to.
Thank
So
you so
one
much.
word of advice I normally which I give for young professionals is, um, when you start your career, for initial couple of years, at least become a domain expert of that area. For example, if you're starting your career as a public policy professional, join an organization, because whatever you have learned from your academic side, put that to test of the practical side. And then once you do that, then keep your mind open, and whatever areas of interest you are attracted to, I think go in that direction. So when I was being hired for Boeing in 2013, before that I was general counsel for Fidelity, which was a mutual fund company. And I did not intervene in the interview process. But when I got selected, I was very, very curious, and I asked my manager. I said, I am a I have been a mutual fund lawyer. I have been ITS organization lawyer, the private equity lawyer. Why did you choose me to come and become a general counsel for a company which is into aerospace, aviation, and defense? I don't know anything of this. And this deliberately I did not raise when I was being interviewed. But the answer was very, very simple. So the interviewers at that point of time, they told me, we hired you because you are a good general counsel. And that is what Deveshi said, a generalist role. A person who is a domain expert, not an industry expert, perhaps will help you to propel along different industries. So if you are a good public policy domain expert, you can work for Amazon, you can work for Airbus, Boeing, you can work for Hindustan Unilever, you can work for any organization, because you have not restricted yourself to a particular industry. What you have devoted your energies on is to become a sound public policy professional. And if you are a sound public policy professional, your expertise in that area will be useful for any company. Whether it's a tech company, whether it's a generative AI company, whether it's an artificial intelligence company, whether it's a food product company, it doesn't matter. What matters is how good you are at your job. What is your skill? How can you bring solution to your client is something which is very, very important.
Thank you so much for the answer. And sir, we actually had a question that what all suggestions would you like to give to all the students, mostly freshers who want to start their career in the corporate sector? So I was about to ask, but I have already received two very good answers. So going back to our discussion, in basic skills, both of you have mentioned about networking. So from your diverse experience, how do you see networking? You have mentioned that it is important, so, what is the key behind networking and how do you build relationships? And as as a scholar at ISPP, we learned the importance of stakeholder management. And as per my understanding, it is so diverse, right? And for a public policy professional, it becomes even more diverse. So, what are the keys to successful networking and building relationships, especially in this environment?
Great question. I think if I may start, uh, so networking is easier said than done, and I always say that because I think most people, except barring a few, will always feel the butterflies in the stomach when you're going into a room where you don't know anybody, and you've got to introduce yourself and how come how you do that. The first few sentences you speak, who you meet, and how do you kind of do that. So I always say, and I always say this to myself even today, that the first thing that I have to do is I have to show up. I have to be in that room first. I can have 20 reasons for not being in that room, but let me just show up there. And believe me, Harshita, most of the time when I've been in the room, I would have found somebody I know in that room. So that helps. So you would find somebody. Even if I don't know somebody in that room, I'll try and be there. Yes, it's important to then be a bit prepared. So it depends on which networking event you're going to. If it's a industry body event, try and see who you're going, which event you're going to. Try and prepare yourself. There is no better way than to prepare. Have a few questions in your head that you want to try and see the list of people who are going to be in that event. Try and identify who you want to meet and speak to, and introduce yourself. Ask questions. Maybe read up about somebody who's a on which you can probably get information on the net. you know it's difficult to talk about yourself, but it's easier to ask questions. So get started. and then you realize the flow will happen. It's the same thing as when we started this webinar. Uh, the question was, how do you start? What do you say first? And how do you make this interesting? But once you start getting there, you try and understand what your audience or the person you're talking to needs, and build that. Ask those right questions. So again, I will say it's a skill that you will continue to learn all your life, networking. But it's a lovely skill to have. And I'll pass it on to Akhil for his thoughts on this.
Yeah, so whenever I was a science student till class 12th, and one of the things which I remember after that, it was law and commerce, obviously. But one thing which I remember from my class 12 sessions was, how does a piece of iron become a magnet? And the simple answer is, you put a charge to the iron, and when you put a charge to the iron, it becomes a magnet, and then it starts attracting the different pieces of iron and metal. So for all of us, it is very important for us, as Devashi says, is to perhaps look within, energize ourselves. And how does that energy come? That energy comes through knowledge. And the moment you start charging your batteries to knowledge, you start to develop confidence. And when you start to develop confidence, you get acceptance. And when you get acceptance, people automatically want to start and connect with you. So I must admit that when I graduated, and I did my first law degree, I did the company secretary course. I was a very nervous person, and I was not able to speak up during a meeting which was over 3 or 4 people. So during the board meetings, I would rarely speak. My hands will shake. um, and then I was in school not a orator at all, so I was a very nervous person when I was asked to speak somewhere. But I always had that in my mind, that these are some of the deficiencies perhaps which are in my personality. And I decided one day that whatever negativities or insecurities are there inside me, I will remove all of them. And I prepared a list, which I still do. It's an annual exercise of what are the weaknesses that you would try to, and it's an honest confession between you and your conscience, and listen to your conscience. And that is exactly a list which you should do every year, and then remove those kind of insecurities. So one of the biggest insecurity I had was, when we are talking about networking, is I was not able to speak up during, as I said, 5 or more people, I could not speak. So what I did about 12 years ago, I enrolled for a program with the International Bar Association. And this conference was being held in Spain, in Madrid. And I attended that conference. And what I ensured was, which was a big stigma on my conscience, was I wanted to speak at a session. So that was one of the biggest insecurities I had. But I said, now I have to kill it. And then that insecurity, I went to that session. It was about a 50 people session. People they had come, and I had to speak on the merger and acquisitions. So when my chance came, there was a pause. I could not speak for 1 minute. I was checking the mic. I was checking my papers, and my legs were shaking, my hands were trembling. I had cold sweat. But I think that is the day I killed my insecurity. And because of that, I then again enrolled to another public speaking program. And slowly and steadily people started to I started to gain confidence. And when I started to gain confidence, I think the networking automatically came on its own. I perhaps did not have to do much. I only started to enroll for the programs, and I ensured that I speak up at those programs. One thing also what I did, this was in 1997, I also set up a chapter for the Institute of Company Secretaries of India at my hometown. And in my hometown, we did not find faculty. So there were not people who can teach indirect taxation. So I took up that taxation. I said I will now teach. And why I wanted to teach? Because of my insecurity of not being able to speak. That was the another time I tried to kill the same problem. But then the students came, they appreciated, and we had a lot of exchange of ideas and thoughts. So it is all about your confidence. I think whatever insecurities you may have or inhibitions, whether I will be successful, not successful, you will definitely be successful if you keep your mind open for learning. And everything comes back to how good and how open is your mind, whether you are honest to your conscience about your insecurities. If you are honest, if you prepare a list and you clear or kill those negative things, you will become a better network person, in my view.
Thank you so much, sir. It's like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So unless we try, we'll never overcome any of the inhibitions we have. Now, there's a question from the audience. They want to know what is the role of CSR in corporates, and what are the skills that a public policy professional should have if they want to work specifically towards corporate social responsibility.
Okay, let me give it a shot. Uh, so CSR is something that I always say is almost literally from the past. Today, the word that you use is sustainability. The reason I'm differentiating these two is that CSR was understood to be what you would do after you have profits in the business and you would, contribute a part of the profits. Sustainability today means that your business has to be sustainable. Everything that you do inside your business is sustainable. Uh, the reason I'm differentiating these two is that that's the opportunity for a professional here. And I will add a couple of examples from the current business that we are doing. So today we talk about having the government's target of a net zero. To do net zero, you really are talking about ensuring that the use of fossil fuel is taken off, and fossil fuel can be managed in multiple ways, of course. Not having coal generation, and having green power and electric vehicles and all of that. But within the business, for example, and one of the products that Hindustan Lever has is detergents. So Surf is one of the big brands that we have. Now, when we looked at the way Surf ingredients are stacked up, is that one product uses petrochemicals, right? So then we started doing a research in terms of how do we start manufacturing this product by replacing the product which uses petrochemicals or reducing petrochemicals. And that started a project what we call as Clean Future. The reason I'm saying this is that when this came into being, the team that got formed was not only the R&D and the marketing team or the category team, but also involved a public affairs professional, whether it was myself or somebody from my team, because then you needed to understand what the government's thinking is, what government policies are in that space, and how do you align with all of these things. So you may have heard some of our leaders talk about the fact that what's good for India is good for HUL. Is that a tagline that we use? So we said if that's the target, what is the target that we can have in our specific product? And to do that, we engaged with the government. And who engaged on behalf of the company was the public affairs professional. So that's the value that today a public affairs professional is able to attribute, rather than just do CSR as is was understood in the past. And the skill sets, I think the second part of the question was what skills do you need to do something like that. I think the skill sets are no different. The skill sets are the same: understanding the business, understanding what the business wants to achieve, and knowing what's the government's thinking, what's the policy makeup, and how do you kind of manage and marry both of these together. I think that's the opportunity, and I think it's a big opportunity for students to think about. Don't think public affairs is only about going and solving regulatory issues, but also this is a big space, and it'll continue to expand.
So
Yeah.
CSR, has been there in India, for a very, very long time. So if we have seen, big conglomerates like the Tata Group, the Builder Group, and what you have seen in Jamshedpur, how Jamshedpur was set up, I think it was not only the commercial interest, but also a lot of CSR interest that led to development of lot of cities, the industrial townships, as we called, and also the PSUs. If you look at CRIPCO, IFCO, and all those big government Steel Authority of India, the Rourkela plants, I think it was not only because of the commercial interest that the townships emerged, but it was also because of a lot of CSR. But what happened in 2013, and when the Companies Act 2013 came, it was the first time when the CSR became mandatory. And the reason for that was it's a social responsibility. And initially it started as a voluntary thing, but now it's become compulsory. So the idea was that the corporate sector needs to play a very important role in contributing to the development of CSR. And then they set up some financial thresholds that if your company is profitable, has a certain turnover, has a certain asset base, you have to engage in CSR activities. I think for a public policy professional, there is a huge role in implementing the CSR, because what the law requires now you to do is that you should devote CSR in a lot of activities which are mentioned under a annexure of the Companies Act, a schedule under the Companies Act. So the role of the public policy professional will be definitely to be a person who can evaluate those opportunities for the corporation, and advise the board of directors that these are the projects which from a public policy standpoint makes sense for the company. And then be a liaison between the company and the social government or the local authorities in that area, where your registered offices, where your factories are, to help company navigate and develop or invest funds in that area. For example, during COVID, I think we have seen a lot of companies devote a lot of funds for developing or vaccination programs, setting up of hospitals. I think it is a fit case for a public policy professional to go into that space. And I'm sure with with large and the big companies that we have in India, there will be enough opportunities for public policy professionals to become specialized CSR. But I must, something which I don't normally like is the word specialist. And I think this should be a part of your KRA, but do not over engage in becoming a CSR professional, but it should be a part of your role.
So there are two things which are coming up. First, I mean, it is very nice to see how we began the session by discussing trends, licenses, and regulations, and we came up to the point of sustainability. And I think a huge role in it has been done by efficient and effective communication. So one thing which I would really want you both to discuss is how do you communicate when maybe the person in front has no time or is not an expert. As a generalist, I might know 10 things, but the person sitting in front is not knowing those 10 things. So one thing about this communication, and second thing from our audience, lot of questions are coming about importance of data, or there are science students, they are saying "Okay, we have a data specialization, we are good with the analytics." So role of these two things, and how do you see this in future? So this is a question from our audience. How do we leverage data? We come with a background in data. Is it an advantage from a career perspective?
Again, great question. I think communication is the centerpiece, because I think your day job is to communicate, whether you communicate internally and or you communicate externally. And communication is not about your speaking. Communication is as much about your listening, right? So I think unless you've listened well, you will never be able to speak the right thing. So I think you have to constantly, it's also a life skill that you have to learn about communicating well. Be succinct in terms of how you communicate. Be very razor sharp in what you need to communicate. And the importance of data is extremely important, because you you can't be generally talking in air, right? You have to have some data to back up. And therefore it's very important to prepare well. I learn all the time from my finance colleagues or my marketing colleagues in the way they crunch data to make everything look nice, even if the performance of a quarter is not so good. But the ability to present that data is so important, and I think that's a great skill. So we should understand how to do that. To one point, I think you mentioned in questions about the person on the other side may not have enough time to listen, and that's a absolutely right thing. uh, every day we deal with senior government officials, secretaries or additional secretaries or whoever, or even parliamentarians. They don't have an attention span, or they don't give you the attention span of more than 30 seconds or a minute or something. And that's a skill that you learn all the time. I have been thrown out of rooms by telling that you've not come prepared, right? Come prepared and then talk to me. So, and I am sure many professionals have had that experience, right? I think it's very important what is going to be, as generally people talk about, elevator speech. What is your elevator speech? What's your 30-second point that you want to make, that will interest the other person. A government officer is is given you a meeting or an appointment, means that he is willing to listen to you, but make that time worthwhile. Make that time worthwhile by making sure that you've said in those 30 seconds what you want and what is how it helps the government. Try and see what you can bring that together. So you will learn this skill over a period of time. It's not written in any book that you can learn and go and execute. But I think communication is the centerpiece of everything. Data is important to be able to crunch that communication well, and be very tight in terms of what you need to speak in those first 30 seconds or 1 minute.
And let me give you three examples. So, the first example, perhaps of a medical student, somebody who's a final year medical student, he has or she has studied for 5 years, and they go for a viva. And in that viva, the medical supervisor will ask you about a particular case. And then you have to apply your 5 years of learning in those 30 seconds about the diagnosis. That exactly is communication. How you apply your knowledge and how you convince with your knowledge your examiner in 1 minute. So similar to what Deveshi said about dealing with a government official, how do you convince that person, how well prepared you come, how well you have studied as a medical student. The second example of a civil engineer, a bridge has collapsed. So a minister calls the civil servant or the engineer and asks for a reason why the bridge has collapsed. So the civil engineer perhaps will have to do all research and come up with the exact answer as to why did the bridge collapse. The third example is, what comes to us very often as lawyers. So when we have a Supreme Court judgment, that Supreme Court judgment will run into 1,000 pages, but our CEO is waiting in office and asking us what happened. So how do you describe what happened in 1,000 pages? And you have to send a WhatsApp message which is not more than 3 or 4 lines long, and you have to provide that gist of 1,000 pages in 3 or 4 lines. Similarly, for your email communication, so you are a subject knowledge expert, but that does not mean that your CEO or your business colleagues have time to read all those assessments, or the summaries or the synopsis or the PhD research you have done. What they are only interested is in what is the problem that your PhD thesis is trying to solve. And that is the question, and that's the effective communication which all of the professionals in every sphere perhaps will need to develop. So you have to learn the art of how succinctly you can explain the problem and provide a solution. The another important thing which is associated to this is, always when you are in a organization and when you are in a meeting, please open your mind for hearing other person's point of view, because you may come up with one set of thoughts, but when you are working in a company, what does not matter is what is your thought of point of view, what is the other's point of view, and how you are able to collaborate to develop a strategy which is for the benefit of your organization, which will only happen once you have analyzed everybody's point of view and come up with the right solution.
So succinct, razor sharp is the way communication should be done, both ways, from corporate to government and government to probably corporate. The words we are hearing are CEOs and civil servants and government officials time and again. here I would like to kind of understand that to what extent the do these two professionals impact each other? What I mean to say is that to what extent does public policy shape corporate strategy? And vice versa, to what extent does corporate strategy or corporate demands shape the way public policy is handled at, let's say, the ministry level, state level, or just for the national agenda itself? If
Again, a very heavy question. I think we can spend a few hours on that question, but I think that's the key. That's the crux of everything, right? Of this profession. So I think partly it depends on the industry that you are in. Some industries, the play of policy is more than in some other industries, right? That's the nature of the industry. Uh, for example, it could be defense. So defense, for example, will have national security interests and other things, and therefore the play in which the policy will shape up will be very different from, let's say, an FMCG space. Having said that, it's very important to understand what kind of policies you need to anticipate as you go forward. So I'll give you an example in FMCG. Uh, FM, a company like HUL or maybe companies like HUL have always been known. The strength of these companies have been known for two things. One is brands, and two is distribution, ability to distribute because of the depth of distribution. What has happened in the last few years is the myth of distribution has been caught, because today distribution happens with very different channels also. You have e-commerce, you have quick commerce, you have direct to customers. Look at a company like Mamaearth. Mamaearth came in a few years back in the FMCG space, a space which was always known that you can't get into this space or you can't succeed in this space if you can't distribute very well. But because the new channels have come up, therefore the new opportunities have come up for new businesses to come in, and that leads to what's the policy space in that, right? And therefore, if you see e-commerce regulations coming, the e-commerce policy come up, right? The data protection policy come up. Those new areas have come up, which were not there, a few years back, and therefore the ability to understand this, be an early player in contributing into these things. Even few years back, when the government was thinking about data protection, they called only the big tech players, because government thinking was that's a problem of tech. And we quickly realized and went to the government and said, absolutely, it's a tech problem, but it's not a standalone tech problem. Companies like us hold the maximum amount of data because that's the consumer ability of consumer research that we do, right? And therefore we need to have a seat on the table, and that's the role that a public policy professional has to play to create that. So I'm trying to answer both sides, one in within the company but also with the government, to be able to tell the government why you should be in the meeting, why you should be on the table, to be able to kind of look and contribute. But like
So
I
yeah,
said, it's a long
likewise.
question. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, 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 no. Likewise, for even our industry, for an example, aviation, defense, all the products get developed because of the public policy considerations. For example, initially you were wanting to fly between cities. Now you want to fly between continents. Now you want to develop products related to the defense and the security of the nation. So all these things emerge from what the public policy considerations are: how aircraft should be manufactured, what should be the safety requirements, what should be the materials that should go into manufacture, what should be the carbon zero emission considerations, uh, reduce carbon emissions, sustainable aviation fuel, use of replacement of the traditional fossil fuel. I think everything, all the kind of industry where we work in, and you apply that thought to all the emerging, uh, 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 companies today, for example, even Flipkart or Amazon, they got developed because people wanted a solution, and they wanted to, especially the role that we have seen during COVID times. Imagine if Amazon or Flipkart were not operating during COVID, how would we have survived during lockdowns? So all those kind of things, there is a very strong element of public policy which should be understood, and then it has to be translated to your corporate strategy, and then you have to be seen that you are trying to solve a problem from not only for the purpose of generating profits, but your companies have to be seen as something which is contributing to the overall benefit of the public at large, and that public policy piece becomes very, very important. So company will also see you. So today we see that there is a financial reporting, there is a ESG reporting, and then companies of the future will be more valued if they devote a lot of work on ESG and public policy considerations. So you may, for an instance, you may have a perfect balance sheet, but if you are not very good on ESG and public policy parameters, and those aspects have not been disclosed in your annual report, investors will not come to you. So I think there is a tremendous opportunity for this public policy role to be very, very effective on supporting an organization on non-financial matters. Something which has to be, which has become very, very critical for a development of a corporation, and you have to be seen as contributing to a country's agenda than a company agenda.
So taking these words from you, non-financial, non-market communication is the core. So then the question comes is, how do you measure the success when such kind of initiatives are taken care of? Because on the other side, you have profits to show, you have all the data parameters to show, but when it comes about public policy, right? So how do you measure it and how do you explain it?
Good
So
question
it is
again.
about,
Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead
sorry.
again.
No, I think it's about, the health of an organization. So you may say that a person is 5 feet 11, a person waist size is 32, but if the person is not healthy from inside, the person cannot be relied upon. And I think the intrinsic health of a person is like what you have a public policy and a ESG reporting. That is a internal reporting rather than a physical appearance of a person. That's how I normally tell, the sessions where I go to. It has to be both how you look, how you appear versus what you are from inside. And if both you are able to demonstrate, you will be able to get investors, and your company will be seen as to be valuable.
Yeah, so I was just going to add to this to say that how do you I think the question is also how do you measure your success? And I think that goes back to the previous question you asked about how well you communicate, how well you are able to build your KRAs, your that you need to deliver. And I think the challenge obviously is that no public policy solutions are achieved in on quarter basis. They take time. So your ability to communicate that with your leadership cohort is very important, and also show progress that you're making on a real time basis. You can't wait for 3 years to say, okay, now I've reached here. You have to show that progress, because remember one thing: when you work in a corporate, you have to understand that you have to align with the corporate. You can't be thinking differently just because your line may take longer time. So you need to communicate with them. You need to say how you are making that progress, and where you need help. So all of these things are important. Involve other people, very important. I have realized, involve your top leadership. The more you involve, they understand the challenges that are there, and they try and help you solve for the issues. So if you do all of these things, you will be seen as a valuable player in the team, because as Akhil said, this is the real internal health of that you're working for. Your numbers can be great, but if you have not done some of these things right, then your shareholders or the investors will not spare you. And there are enough examples in the public domain of such companies.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful analogy, intrinsic health, which is always more important than the appearance, right? So thank you so much to both of our panelists for giving the time, for giving the consideration and answering all our questions. Thank you, Mr. Akhil, Mr. Devashish. And on the behalf of ISPP team, lot to learn. And as somebody who is currently working in the corporate affairs department, the two things which I personally took, they were be a ninja, right? That I would always keep that with me, and I'll enter more rooms. I'll be more open. And thank you so much for the time. And I would also like to thank all the attendees. Thank you so much for asking wonderful questions. Hopefully, we have answered your queries. And thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much, Shubhangi. And thank you so much to Alma Mater Indian School of Public Policy for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everyone. Thank you. It was a
Thank
lovely
you.
interaction.